So over the next 12 sessions, my aim is to give you a clear, structured view of Carl Jung's Red Book without overwhelming you or keeping you on Zoom for too long. To make that work, each class will be mainly a lecture with a smaller amount of time for questions. A typical class will consist of roughly 50 to 60 minutes of presentation, followed by 30 to 40 minutes at the end for questions, as time permits. I'm sure that many, if not all of you, are familiar with Jung and have ideas you'd like to share, which is wonderful. As I indicated in the participation guidelines I sent out a week ago, I want to make sure we hear from as many people as possible and still finish on time. And that is 9 o'clock Eastern time. Therefore, I'm going to ask that you use the chat to send in your questions and short comments as we go along. I will be relying on Linda, our Zoom master, to let me know when there are questions or comments in the chat that it would be helpful for me to address during the lecture portion itself. She will focus on those that are relevant to the whole group. Once the remaining questions in the chat have been dealt with, as many of the points people would like to raise at that time. So because our time together each week is limited, this won't be a full discussion group. There also won't be time for long personal stories or detailed back and forthing. That doesn't mean your experiences aren't important. They absolutely are. But my focus will be on providing everyone with a solid overview of the material. Even if I don't have time to answer every question during our scheduled time, adding your thoughts to the chat or sending me a private email afterwards may help shape what I say in my email the next day or emphasize in later classes. To help with sound quality, please stay on mute unless invited to speak. And if you are called on, try to keep your questions brief and to the point. If I ever need to gently interrupt or move us on, it's simply so that I can keep my promise to you about finishing on time, but still covering the key ideas. So thank you very much for being here and for helping to create a respectful, focused space for everyone. With that, let's get started. So I'd like to highlight the second half of Jung's remarks in the short excerpt of his interview with the BBC's John Freeman because of their far-sightedness and their continuing, if not increasing, relevance in our present circumstances. Now, for those of you who are new, one of the things that I do maybe differently than other people is I ask for volunteers to help read so that you don't have to just listen to me all night. So what I'll do is I'll share my screen, which have the readings on them. And hopefully this will all work. There we go. So
Mark,
I need somebody. Sorry, are you not seeing it?
I'm seeing those gray bars again. I don't know if anyone else
let me fix that. Sorry.
Yeah.
There we go. They should be gone momentarily.
Here's another one. Good.
Does that fix it?
Yep. Thank you.
Good. Okay. Now, unfortunately, I'm unable to see any people's faces. We tested this earlier today and we thought we had it solved, but I am unable to see anyone except the readings. So anyway, we'll have to deal with that next time. So I see that Leslie has raised her hand. So I'm wondering, Leslie, if you would mind reading our first one for us.
Yes. Number one, C.G. Jung, quote, "We are so full of apprehension, fears, that one doesn't know exactly to what a particular dream, points. One thing is sure, a great change of our psychological attitude is imminent. That is certain." John Freeman asks, and why? He answers, because we need more psychology, We need more understanding of human nature because the only real danger that exists is man himself. He is the great danger, and we are pitifully unaware of it. We know nothing of man, far too little. His psyche should be studied because we are the origin of all coming evil.
Okay, that's a very powerful statement, and it's becoming even more relevant as time goes, as far as I'm concerned. This somber thought that humans are the source of all coming evil provides us with an urgent motive for turning our own attention towards human nature. Jung understands the term psyche to mean a combination of consciousness and unconsciousness. As we will see, he explored the unconscious both in its personal and collective dimensions, as well as its interactions with the conscious to a degree no other psychologist appears to have done. Certainly no one else has documented their imaginal encounters with the precision and artistry that Jung subsequently brought to bear on his self-imposed tasks. If we are to understand human nature, Jung declares that we can ill afford to disregard the messages the unconscious is forever sending us. If we turn a blind eye to them, the spurned personal unconscious may create neuroses and psychoses to get our attention. In a similar fashion, if the collective unconscious is disdained by humanity for a long period, we have already seen the kind of damage it is capable of orchestrating in the form of the 20th century's two world wars, along with countless other catastrophic world events. Jung's willingness to seek out closer contact with the unconscious, to say nothing of the courage required, as well as his readiness to be guided by its advice, eventually led him to achieve his goal of individuation at the end of his life. Briefly, this term refers to a harmonization of the conscious and the unconscious. It also involved the synchronization of the four functions he recognized within every human being, those being thinking, feeling, intuition, and sensation. To arrive at this goal of individuation, it was necessary for Jung to expand the boundaries of his search for truth beyond the strict confines of the psychology of his day. Now, I have a slide. Well, this was a handout that I sent everyone on Sunday. He accomplished this by several steps. Through his world-embracing mythology that he displayed in symbols of transformation, by reestablishing contact with his soul in the Red Book, also confronting his shadow in the Red Book, bolstering his capacity for feeling, his pitifully inferior function in the Red Book. And that's a phrase that comes from Marie van Franz, not from himself. He also sought for historical precedents and predecessors, and he found them in Gnosticism and alchemy. And he devised a variety of ways to concretely express the profound insights he had gained during the explosion of unconscious contents he survived from 1913 to 1916 through his writings up to the end of his life in 1961. So these 6 steps actually constitute a high-level overview of the events we will be investigating as we progress through part 2 of this course on the imaginal realm.
Mark?
Yes.
We've had an inquiry. Please define individuation.
I will be as we go through the rest of the course. Okay. I don't think it would really help to say much at this point. I guess the only thing I could say is that individuation is becoming your true self. But we need to go into a lot more detail in the future in order to understand what that is. Well, maybe we'll just leave that where it is. So let me formally welcome you all to part 2 of the Open Your Inner Eye course. Part 1, which most of you attended during the winter of 2025, focused on the human soul, also known as the trust of God. We also studied the nature of the imaginal realm, which is known as Malakut in Arabic, as it was described by Baha'u'llah and Abdu'l-Baha. As you will no doubt recall, this led us to investigate a series of accounts of unique human experiences in the imaginal realm. We began with the Gnostic tale known as the Hymn of the Pearl, moved on to narratives involving the prophets Moses and Muhammad, and then explored descriptions offered by Islamic mystic philosophers such as Ibn Sina, Ibn Arabi, Rumi, and Sheikh Ahmed al-Aqsai. I'm out of practice. I haven't been talking to people for very long. In part 2, we will dive deeply into the imaginal experiences of the psychologist Carl Gustav Jung, who was born on July 26, 1875, and died June 6 of 1961. As recorded in his posthumously published Red Book. Because these encounters were documented just over a century ago, and by a well-educated, articulate European, the barriers to understanding should be somewhat easier to overcome than those posed by the material we studied last year. But that's not to say that they won't still present us with impressive challenges. In our first 2 classes, I will describe the most relevant circumstances leading to Jung's private explorations of his inner country from 1913 to 1916. The remaining sessions will concentrate on a detailed study of the Liber Novus, which is Latin for new book, which is more commonly known as the Red Book, that he compiled from his journals. The English translation of his 7 journals, which he named the Black Books, was published 11 years after the Red Book in 2020. Labeling it his most dangerous experiment, Jung spent the remaining 45 years of his life recasting the prophetic pronouncements that first appeared in the Black Books before being transferred and slightly modified into the Red Book, into more psychologically or scientifically acceptable language. Sorry. As he was to say later, this Red Book was the lava from which his mature, most famous concepts were derived. These include the archetypes, the collective unconscious, introversion and extroversion, the anima and the animus, the shadow, the self, and most importantly, the process of individuation. In the final session of part 2, I will compare Jung's many insights into the nature and development of the soul with those of the Baha'i faith. My hope is that through this journey, we will gain a new appreciation of the wisdom and fluidity of the human soul, with any luck coming away with a clearer sense of how to approach and develop an ongoing relationship with our own souls and inferior functions. It is important to note at the start that Carl Jung insisted that every person's journey to and with their soul is unique. He was adamant that people not try to copy or imitate his individual journey. Yes, it's true, he took considerable pains to document his inner experiences in the Red Book. But his goals in doing so were to first concretize his profound experiences, to manifest them in physical reality, and second, to provide his future readers with an example of the kind of interactions they might expect to encounter should they also choose to engage one-on-one with what he called the spirit of the depths. Now I'm going to offer 2 caveats. First of all, I would like you to know from the beginning of this course that I am not a psychologist. I have no medical training either. I'm certainly not qualified to hand out personal psychological advice. I consider myself an outsider for that matter, an enthusiastic amateur in this subject area. However, given the significant attention Carl Jung paid to religious, even mystical issues during his lifetime, I have been drawn to his works ever since I was a university undergraduate in the 1970s. At that time, Jung was the only psychologist I discovered who asserted that the fundamental focal point of psychology should be the soul. So, I also want to point out, this is the second caveat, how selective my research on Jung has been. There are vast fields of Jungian study that I have had to set aside despite their inherent allure. Three of the most prominent are on this screen. So, the full life story. It is fascinating, but it's going to take time for you to absorb it if you haven't in any detail. Deirdre Baer's biography is still probably the best treatment at this point, although it has its flaws. She invents dialogue that never happened, for instance. And then there's what's been called all along his autobiography, Memories, Dreams, and Reflections, which was published in 1961. As it's become clear over time, many editors, as well as Analia Yaffe, were responsible for antifying, as in the sense of making his language and raw experiences a little more palatable to people. And as it turns out, just a month ago, the so-called protocols of this book, these were the interviews that Yaffe had with Jung late in his life, were just published in English for the first time. I'm in the process of reading that. It's a bit of an eye-opener. Anyway, so that's one area that I'm not going to cover. The other is I'm going to touch on Jung's 10-year relationship with Sigmund Freud, but you could spend your life studying that interaction. And I have here the letters are 650 pages long, and there's much more material available. And I'm also not really going to spend much time talking about his decades-long investigations into Gnosticism and alchemy. As I say here, there's only one published book at this point by Jung that's on Gnosticism, which is called Aeon. Dr. Alfred Ribby, though, has done a great deal of research in Zurich and has written 2 volumes, which are fantastic, describing the alchemical notebooks that Jung kept. These are in the process of being translated at the moment, so they should be available in another year or so. And then there are the 3 volumes that he published late in his life on alchemy directly, as well as the companion work that Marie-Louise von Franz published with his help. So there's much to chew on in this. I mean, you could spend probably 10 years studying just those 4 books before you have a really good sense of what he was talking about. So, the next section is I refer to as the misunderstood pioneer. In November 1960, 7 months before his death, Carl Jung suffered from what he called the lowest ebb of feeling I ever experienced. He explained his sentiments in a letter to Eugene Rolfe, a member of the Analytical Psychology Club in London, England. Now, I need a reader for number 2, and I think Milton has put his hand up at some point, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay. I had to understand that I was unable to make the people see what I am after. I am practically alone. There are a few who understand this and that, but almost nobody sees the whole. I have failed in my foremost task, to open people's eyes to the fact that man has a soul, and there is buried treasure in the field, and that our religion and philosophy are in a lamentable state. Why indeed should I continue to exist?
Thank you. So looking back over the 65 years since he wrote this letter, it seems that Jung has good reason to lament. He still has not been fully understood or appreciated. However, the reason for this didn't just lie in the sprawling scope and complex nature of his writings. It was only 17 years ago that the world learned that Jung had not revealed the entirety of his work. During his life, Jung consciously and cautiously chose not to publicly share the experiential key to his vast opus. He understood only too well that it would not be understood, at least not during his lifetime. The missing key, we now know, was his long-hidden red book, the work Jung formally titled Liber Novus, a Latin phrase meaning the new book. He began this book when he was 38 years old. It is based on experiences that he carefully recorded in his black book journals between 1913 and 1916. Liber Novus contained Jung's account of a life-altering journey into the depths of vision. At the beginning, he called his adventure my most difficult experiment. For the next 16 years, Jung labored at calligraphically transcribing and illuminating a compilation from his journals into the exquisite large format folio volume known as the Red Book. This was his buried treasure. We now know that it was the foundation of Jung's oeuvre and the Rosetta Stone to decode his subsequent interpretations of creative imagination. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is the actual Red Book, which he left on his desk open for many, many years. Nearly a century after its composition, the publication in 2009 of Liber Novus has initiated a broad reassessment of Jung's place in cultural history. Among many revelations, the visionary events recorded within it expose the experiential foundations of Jung's complex association with the Western tradition of gnosis, a perennial practice that he identified as the historical forerunner of his own psychology. Near the end of his life, Jung spoke with his close associate Analia Jaffe about the overall nature of his work. Oh, we need another reader. And Linda, I am not able to see any hands, any faces, so I'm going to have to rely.
There are no hands raised right now, Mark.
I see. So
we'll wait for one. And anyone like to raise their hand to read? Jack will read.
Thank you, Jack.
Number 3, right?
Yes, please.
The main interest of my work is not concerned with the treatment of neurosis, but rather with the approach to the numinous. But the fact is that the approach to the numinous is the real therapy. And inasmuch as you attain to the numinous experience, you are released from the curse of pathology. Even the very disease takes on a numinous character. Analia Jaffe with C.G. Jung, A Mystic and Other Essays, 1989, page 16.
Okay, and that brings us to the very important concept, the numinous. I'm just going to read this off. This fundamental Jungian term is derived from the Latin word numen, meaning divinity. It was coined by the German theologian Rudolf Otto in his 1917 book, The Idea of the Holy. The word numinous refers to the non-rational elements in what is experienced in religions as the holy. Otto distinguished 4 closely related features of the numinous, calling them collectively Mysterium Tremendum Fascinans et Augustum. So Mysterium is the first element. It's the holy other nature of the holy. So this is the idea of the utter transcendence of God. It is the source of the religious term via negativa, This Latin phrase may be translated as negative theology or apophotic theology. This was a position famously articulated by the Jewish philosopher Moses Maimonides, who stated that meaningful statements about God can only be in the negative or by negation. So the Baha'i teachings on the essence of God clearly fall into this category of negative theology. The second feature is tremendum. This aspect generates boundless awe and wonder in the person who experiences the holy. Then there's fascinans. This aspect entrances and captivates the individual. And finally, Augustum. This is the supreme subjective value the holy has for humans, as well as its objective value. So when Jung is talking about the approach to the numinous, he's really talking in religious terms about the approach to God, or whatever equivalent a person has if they don't like the concept of God. So for Jung, the term numinous also became an alternate name for the primal experience of gnosis. Gnosis means knowledge, a special kind of experiential knowledge. After Jung's death in 1961, his decades-old attraction to the numinous, especially as expressed by the word gnosis, became a troubling issue for the custodians and propagators of Jung's work. They wanted to know if Jung's psychology should be viewed as a spiritual discipline or as a clinically validated therapy. Most lean towards the latter. Now, I am getting a little notice here that suggests that Durham might be interested in reading number 4. Am I correct?
Durham put his hand down. And Durham, did you want to read?
Okay, I can read 4.
Okay.
Excellent.
There was obviously no professional profit in nominating Jung as a Gnostic prophet. Of course, many Jungian therapists continue to affirm the essentially spiritual aspects of their work, and they quote Jung in support, but culturally and professionally, it remains problematic to associate a school of clinical psychology with a widely anathematized heresy intimately entangled in the origin of Christianity. Lance Owens, forward by Alfred Raby, The Search for Roots. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So this word anathematize is a heavy one. It means to solemnly and formally condemn someone or something. And so that's what happened in the history of the Christian church. I would say around the year 300 AD, where there had been quite a struggle, from what we can tell at this point, between what became the mainstream church and the Gnostics. Anyway, the mainstream church won the battle and then tried to eliminate every trace of this heresy that they had been victorious over. And so very little was kept of true gnosis at that particular time, although things are now starting to come to light. That's a whole different subject. So for many Jungian analysts, empathetic links between Jung and the Gnostic tradition remain directly opposed to the scientific respectability of their profession. The issue of therapy as a spiritual practice has become the perpetual source of what might be called holy wars within the fragmented Jungian analytical tradition. So let's turn to some of the early professional developments that Jung experienced. What were some of the events that led C.G. Jung to look for his lost soul, which he found in the molten lava of his inner world in January 1914? As is the case with so many young people, it took Jung quite a while to decide what he wanted to be when he grew up. So I see that Heather has her hand up.
Mark, Roxanne and Rob, I think
okay.
I've got an order here in
Excellent.
Roxanne.
I'm going to allow you to tell me who's
Yeah.
on base.
Okay.
Okay.
My interest drew me in different directions. On the one hand, I was powerfully attracted by science with its truths based on facts. On the other hand, I was fascinated by everything to do with comparative religion. In the sciences, I was drawn principally to zoology, paleontology, and geology. In the humanities, to Greco-Roman, Egyptian, and prehistoric archaeology. At that time, of course, I did not realize how very much this choice of the most varied subjects corresponded to the nature of my inner dichotomy. What appealed to me in science were the concrete facts and their historical background, and in comparative religion, the spiritual problems into which philosophy also entered. In science, I missed the factor of meaning, and in religion, that of empiricism. Science met to a very large extent the needs of number one personality, whereas the humane or historical studies provided beneficial instruction for number two.
Oh, thank you. So we're going to discuss Jung's two personalities in a later class. For now, we only need to know that he eventually decided to study medicine. But what type of medicine, he wondered. He was tending towards internal medicine when something happened which removed all my doubts concerning my future career. Okay, Linda, who's on board for 6?
Heather Harvey.
Excellent. Hi, Heather.
Heather.
When I was 25 in 1900, I passed my final examination in medicine. It had been my intention to specialize in internal medicine. Nothing was further from my mind than psychiatry. One reason for this was the fact that my father, as a minister, was connected with the canonical insane asylum and very much interested in psychiatry. Like all sons, I knew that whatever my father was interested in was wrong, and so I avoided it carefully as carefully as I could. I had never read even one book having to do with psychiatry. But when it came time for me to take my final examinations, I got a textbook and started to investigate this idiotic subject. The book was by Kraft Ebing, Lehrbuch der Psychiatrie, 4th edition, and I said to myself, anybody so foolish as to write a textbook on this subject is bound to explain himself in a preface. So I turned to the preface. By the time I had finished the first page, I was on edge with interest. By the time I was halfway down the second page, I had such a beating of the heart I could hardly go on. By God, I said, that is what I will be, a psychiatrist. Jung, Introduction to Jungian Psychology.
Thank you very much. Very animated. At that time, psychiatry was generally held in contempt. No one really knew anything about it, and there was no form of psychology which studied a person as a whole, including the possible range of pathologies. Okay, so now we turn back to him in Memories, Dreams, Reflections, number 7.
Jerry and Bill have their hand up. Sherry, are you or Bill going to read the next reading?
Yes,
I'm not sure what's happening there. Let's go to Elizabeth, and maybe Sherry and Bill can read a further reading. Elizabeth, would you like to unmute yourself?
Okay, you can hear me now. Hmm?
Yes, we
Yes.
can. Thank you.
The director was locked up in the same institution with his patients, and the institution was equally cut off, indicated, isolated on the outskirts of the city, like the ancient lazaret with its lepers. No one liked looking at that in that direction. The doctors knew almost as little as the layman, and therefore shared his feelings. Mental disorder was a hopeless and fatal affair, which cast its shadow over psychiatry as well. Okay, Jung. Okay, memories, dreams, and reflections.
Mm-hmm. It's a pretty gloomy picture. Nevertheless, Jung was thunderstruck by two of Krafft Ebing's statements. First, due to the incomplete state of development of psychiatry, its textbooks currently exhibited a subjective character. And two, that psychoses were diseases of the personality. In a flash of illumination, Jung saw that psychiatry offered him a unique opportunity to unite his two disparate fields of interest. Okay, so maybe Bill is ready for number 8.
Let's. Hello, Kellys.
Yes.
Are you there?
Can you hear?
Yep.
Can you hear?
Yes, please.
Okay, good. Number 8. Here was the empirical field common to biological and spiritual facts, which I had everywhere sought and nowhere found. Here at last was the place where the collision of nature and spirit became a reality.
Okay, thank you. Jung saw that psychiatric textbooks were in part, quote, the subjective confession of the author, unquote. With his own specific set of prejudices and the totality of his own being, in short, what he would later call his personal equation, he responds to the disease of the personality of his patients with the whole of his own biased personality. So you have a combination of the flaws of the patient and the flaws of the analyst. Jung's teachers and friends looked upon his decision with amazement and disappointment. No one, including himself, had ever imagined he would become interested in such an obscure bypath. All right, so number 9.
That's Lisa.
Oh, great.
Thanks, Lisa.
My friends were astounded and put out, thinking me a fool for throwing up the enviable chance of sensible career in internal medicine, which dangled so temptingly before my nose, in favor of this psychiatric nonsense.
Nevertheless, he pursued it. In his third book, which is called The Psychology of Dementia Praecox, which is the old term for schizophrenia, he argued that psychiatry is a dialogue between the sick psyche and the psyche of the doctor, who is presumed to be normal. Okay, number 10. Any other readers?
Linda O'Neill, please.
Thank you.
It is a coming to terms between the sick personality and that of the therapist, both in principle equally subjective. My aim was to show that delusions and hallucinations were not just specific symptoms of mental disease, but also had a human meaning. C.G. Jung, Memories, Dreams, Reflections.
And what he means by that is that so-called normal people, even therapists, could experience delusions and hallucinations themselves. Needless to say, this was a radical point of view at that time. Okay, now let's, if we've got, Linda, have we got questions, or I see you've raised your hand?
No, I thought I would read.
Oh, okay, well, hang on, I'll get to you in a minute.
Okay.
Now, in December of the year 1900, Jung moved from Basel to Zurich, both of which are in Switzerland. And it's a distance of 80 kilometers. in order to take up his post as an assistant physician at the Burghölzli Mental Hospital. And I just happen to have a photograph, a current photograph of this institution. For the first 6 months, he locked himself within its monastic walls in order to get accustomed to the life and spirit of the asylum, he later wrote. He even read the 50 volumes of the German history of psychiatry to acquaint himself with the psychiatric mentality. Not unexpectedly, his total concentration and self-imposed confinement within this institution alienated him from his colleagues. They had no way of knowing how strange psychiatry seemed to him at that time and how eager he was to penetrate its spirit. Okay, Linda, how about number 11? All right, there we are.
There we go. For 6 months, I was struggling desperately to find myself in it, and was all the time more and more baffled. I was deeply humiliated to see that my chief, and that's Eugen, I think it would be Eugen Bleuler, director of the Burghölzli Hospital from 1898 to 1927, and my colleagues seemed to feel sure of themselves, and that it was only I who was drifting helplessly. My failure to understand gave me such feelings of inferiority that I could not bear to go out of the hospital. Here was I, a man with a profession which I could not rightly grasp. I therefore stayed in all the time and gave myself to the study of my cases.
Thank you. So, interestingly, the director of the Burghölzli Mental Hospital until 1898, 2 years before he entered, was Auguste Forel, this fellow. The Swiss psychiatrist, neuroanatomist, a person who studies brain anatomy, and myrmecologist, a person who studies ants. Under his direction, the Burghölzli achieved world renown. He used hypnotism to cure patients, mental patients. His success rate was high, not only with hospital inmates, but also with sufferers of rheumatism and other physical ailments. His biggest success, however, came from his treatment of alcoholics. He claimed that his excellent results were due to his own abstinence, a lifestyle he convinced his successor, Bleuler, to adopt. So Baha'is are familiar with Forel's name because of a tablet he received from Abdu'l-Baha, the son of the founder, Baha'u'llah, dated September the 21st, 1921. This first appeared in print in Persian in 1922 and was translated into English in 1976. In this tablet, which is generally considered to be Abdu'l-Baha's last significant philosophical work, he discusses three main issues: the differences between the mineral, vegetable, animal, and human worlds; second, the spiritual nature of man; and third, proofs of the existence of God. It also expounds the logical necessity of the existence of the mind and the relationship between the faculties of the mind and the human soul. You can download this tablet from the Baha'i Reference Library by looking for the tablet to Dr. Auguste Forel. For his part, when he arrived 2 years after Forel resigned, gradually Jung became annoyed with Forel because of the way he puttered about the hospital for years after, nattering and meddling in every aspect of hospital business. In 1920, 11 years after Jung left the hospital in 1909 to go into private practice, Dr. Forel became a member of the Baha'i faith. He had learned of its teachings through his son-in-law. These prompted him to abandon his former racist and socialist views, as evidenced by the following statement in his last will and testament. Okay, let's go back here for number 12.
That's Hangame.
Oh, great. Hi.
This is the true religion of human social good. without dogmas or priests, uniting all men on this small terrestrial globe of ours. I have become a Baha'i. May this religion live and prosper for the good of mankind. This is my most ardent wish.
Okay, thank you. So let's look at Jung's marriage and children for a moment. On February 14th, 1903, Jung married Emma Rauschenbach, who lived from 1882 to 1955. She was 7 years his junior. She was the elder daughter of a wealthy industrialist in eastern Switzerland. Rauschenbach was the owner, among other concerns, of IWC Schaffhausen, the international watch company, a manufacturer of luxury timepieces. Until his death in 1905, his two daughters and their husbands, upon his death at that time, his two daughters and their husbands became owners of the business. Jung's brother-in-law, Ernst Homburger, became the principal proprietor, but the Jungs remained shareholders in a thriving business that ensured the family's financial security for decades. Emma Jung, whose education had been limited, showed considerable ability and interest in her husband's research and threw herself into studies and acted as his assistant at Burghölzli. She eventually became a noted psychoanalyst in her own right. The marriage lasted until Emma died in 1955. They had 5 children, 4 daughters and 1 son. None of the children continued their father's career. But the daughters Agatha and Marianne assisted in publishing his work. Now let's talk about the association tests which Jung carried out. These were to make him famous around the world. One of the first things Eugene Bleuler did as director was to introduce the use of psychological tests, such as they existed at that time. He gave Jung the task of experimenting with what was called the word association test. This offered Jung a chance to achieve one of his goals, which was, quote, to catch the intruders in the mind, the intruders that make people laugh when they should not laugh and cry when they should not cry. This turned out to be his first concerted effort to detect the unconscious. Now that's in number 13. Any other readers available?
I've just put out a request.
I can read again.
There we go, Master A and David. That would be David. Are you there, David? Nice to see you. You're muted, David.
I thought I unmuted myself. Oh,
There you are.
14?
13, please.
13. When I developed my association tests, it was the defects that the tests brought out that held my interest. I made careful notes of the places where people could not achieve the experiments, and out of these observations I came to my theory of autonomous complexes as being the cause of the blockage in libido flow. Freud at the same time was evolving his conception of the complex.
Okay. Thank you. And so what exactly did these association tests involve? I guess Milton is ready for this one. Or is it Bill? Or
Sherry and or Bill?
Okay.
In his word association test, doctor and patient were to sit facing one another, and the doctor would read out a list of 100 words. On hearing each of these, the patient was to say the first thing that came into their head. The patient must try never to delay speaking, and that they strive to be extremely honest in reporting whatever they were thinking of, however embarrassing, strange, or random it might seem. Trial runs convinced Jung and his colleagues that they had hit upon an extremely simple yet highly effective method for revealing parts of the mind that were normally relegated to the unconscious. Patients who in ordinary conversation would make no allusions to certain topics or concerns would, in a word association session, quickly let slip critical aspects of their true selves. The idea is that, under pressure to respond as quickly and unthinkingly as possible.
Mark, you'll need to move the.
Oh, I beg your pardon. Sorry.
The patient would deliver up contents from the instinct-driven subconscious mind rather than the more deliberate conscious mind.
Would Bill want to continue on with 15, which is directly following?
Sure. Jung used 100 words in particular to provoke these deep-seated reactions. While some of these words may sound fairly charged, angry, abuse, dead, most could hardly seem more ordinary, even innocuous. Salt, window, head. When the experiment is finished, I first look over the general course of the reaction times, Jung writes in the original paper. Prolonged times mean that the patient can only adjust himself with difficulty and that his psychological functions proceed with marked internal frictions with resistances. He found that it was precisely where there were the longest silences that the deepest conflicts in neurosis lay.
Huh. Okay. Jung came to believe that these conflicts and neuroses were caused by experiences, feelings, or thoughts which the person had repressed because they were too painful, too out of character, or not important enough to keep in the conscious mind. This was the same deduction that Freud was promoting. However, as soon as he discovered Freud, he soon realized that he could not agree with Freud's reasons for the repressions. Okay, that's who's on deck here.
Alan is on deck.
16, sir.
In those days, he, Freud, was speaking only of sexual trauma and shocks to explain the repression. I had had then considerable experience with cases of neuroses in which sexual things were of quite secondary importance compared with the role played by the social adaptation.
Okay. So this eventually became one of the reasons he was to part company with Freud in 1913. So the last topic I'd like to talk about tonight is dementia praecox, or schizophrenia. Jung was also actively treating many cases of what was called insanity, particularly with those patients exhibiting dementia praecox. At the beginning of the 20th century, there was virtually no effort made within psychiatry to understand this condition. The psychiatrists were merely interested in describing symptoms and labeling patients. Ellenberger says the psychology of the mental patient played no role whatsoever. Okay, this is a great little final quotation here, number 17. Who would like to read that? Milton. Okay.
A label was put on each case. It was said to be a degeneration here or an atrophy there, and then it was finished. There was nothing more to be done about it. It was only among the nurses that any psychological interest in the patients could be found, and among them there were some very shrewd guesses offered as to the conditions presented. But the doctors knew none of this.
Great, thank you. So Jung bucked this trend, taking it upon himself to treat each individual patient as a person worthy of his full attention. In more than a few cases, he was able to uncover a traumatic event that had initially triggered the person's descent into madness, a state he described as being overwhelmed by the contents of the unconscious. Through his observations, he came also to understand but the unconscious contains the pairs of opposites, which outwardly express themselves in symptoms like megalomania and depreciation. As I'm sure you can guess, this is a huge field of study requiring years of study and practice, neither of which I have, so we must set aside this challenging subject. And that, folks, is all I have to say tonight. Let me stop sharing so I can finally see people. I feel like I've been in jail. We've got to fix that problem. Okay, so Linda, did we have any comments or questions in the chat that we need to address?
No, we talked about individuation earlier.
Right.
And Jack put a comment in. The aim of individuation was the integration of the unconscious into a balanced. Oh, I can't read it very well because of the way it's set up here. Sorry. The integration of the unconscious contents into a balanced whole with the conscious mind.
Okay. Now I can finally see people's hands raised. So if you have a comment or question, please feel free to do that. And I see that Sherry and Bill are standing ready to be asked what they have on their minds. So?
Yes. So I was just kind of wondering if you could give some context in terms of scientific attitude or inclusion or exclusion of the concept of soul, which seems to be pretty absolute and prevalent at this point in time. But it seems like that it was not that hard for Carl to be able to bring that up as a possibility with regards to the science of psychiatry. So I was just wondering if, like, back in those times, was the soul not excluded as much as it is now in terms of how scientists look at things?
I would say no, it is. At that time, it was probably similar to what it is today. Maybe not quite so advanced in terms of its exclusion, but there wasn't a lot of interest in it. And he himself said that, as we will see in a later talk, that as an educated person, he had a whole spiel about the soul and what it was, etc., that was not connected to his own soul. It was an intellectual head game that he was playing. And I suspect that most of what passed for information about the soul at that time was of that type of nature. So his delving into the soul was actually quite courageous, quite independent. Making it a serious focus of a scientific study was really outlandish. Any comments about that, or?
Well, it just seemed like he got away with a lot, if that's the case, because, like, if you did that now, like trying to explain climate change to a lot of, to scientists, that the solution was related to the soul, and the soul of individuals and the spirituality of mankind. I wouldn't think you would have as good a chance of being listened to or heard or elevated to prominence as Carl seems to have been.
Well, and now you can start to see some of the reasoning behind his holding back on publishing the Red Book throughout his whole life. Right? It just wasn't kosher. It would have ruined his scientific reputation if he was to do that. And he knew it. So the time just wasn't right. He was so far ahead of his time that the climate wasn't suited to his releasing that information at that point.
I see.
So they had to wait 48 years after his death to convince the family members of the Jung family to release it. So there was a big taboo about it. is what I'm saying.
See.
Yeah. Okay, Jack, what are you saying? You're muted, sir. Sorry. Jack, you're muted.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, kind of like standing naked in public. Who wants to do that? So I had a couple of comments. One, I wondered why Jung called his school analytical psychology. I thought that was a strange name for somebody who was so interested in the soul and the spirit and so on. So when I looked into it, I found out that he called it analytical psychology because he analyzed the contents of the subconscious or the unconscious mind and broke it down into certain key elements. So that satisfied my curiosity. The other comment I wanted to make was about Jung's interests in Gnosticism and alchemy, which you've already mentioned, that Gnosticism was a heresy that was suppressed by the church. Heretical, anathematized, as you said, by the church.
Right.
And the reason why Jung was so interested in both alchemy and Gnosticism was because he found evidence of symbols, images, archetypes in their writings that he realized were precursors of psychology. In other words, they were the Gnostic literature, the alchemical literature had images, symbols, archetypes that were directly relatable to the unconscious. And that's why he was so interested in these things. He felt they were kind of pre-psychological knowledge, if you will, without even long before the science of psychology had ever developed. So, and he also said that when he studied alchemy, like the church suppressed a lot of things, including erotic imagery. And of course, Jung says that it's suppression that leads to psychosis and neurosis. Whereas in alchemy, there were certain erotic images that weren't suppressed. So anyway, I found that interesting that's what, at least I'm expressing it perhaps not quite as cogently as I could, but that's my understanding of why he was interested in these two fields.
Well, and he had such powerful experiences of this journey that he actually took that we'll talk about, that he could detect it in other sources. He could see that the people who wrote these particular things had in fact gone through something very similar to what he had. They used different language to describe it, but essentially, it resonated on his pulses. You could pick that up right away.
Yeah, they were doing their own journey into the unconscious.
Precisely.
Right?
And as I said earlier, every one of us is going to do our own journey. But once you've gone a certain distance along that journey, you can see it in other people.
It's a scary journey.
Well, not necessarily. I don't know. I don't find it that scary.
Well, there's some people that don't want to look into what's in there,
Well, there's a lot of people like that. Absolutely. So I'm very curious. I have to say, I have to turn to Lynette since she's been studying this material for so long. What your reaction is so far?
Muted.
There she is.
Well, it's curious, about the soul, the religion, and so on. Jung grew up with his father, who was a pastor. And so there was this sort of religious and element about it that somehow failed to have sort of embodied reality for Carl Jung. But he had been surrounded all his life with his father's influence from the church, little country church. And then, you know, poor Carl, he was forced into, in a way, confronting those extremely difficult, complex issues in himself. And that was a terrifying experience for him. But it really did. So I kind of agree with Jack. It can be really scary, you know, to have to confront the chaos and the overwhelming power of the unconscious. So he had to really come into a different sense of soul than his father ever had. His father was really afraid of touching into that.
I have a question for you, Mom. I'm Janet. This is
Janet.
Why do you say he was kind of forced into that exploration of the unconscious? What in his life or his world forced him into it?
I think his nature. I think his nature was so intense. He was a very, very intense man. And it just kind of, well, the way the unconscious can, whether it's in a mental illness or not, just roll in on you and kind of take you over. And then he was willing to actually go into it, which nowadays, if you look at people who are distressed mentally, they'll take some drugs and then they don't have to do that. But he was very, very courageous. He made up his mind, I am going to plunge in and I'm going to see what happens here. And he had no guarantees that he would come out okay when he did that.
Well, there were some of the most striking descriptions he's given of his experiences, having to hold on to the table in front of him to make himself realize that he was still part of the physical world. And he would list off his wife's name, his children's name, where he lived, all his other facts to keep himself connected to this world. He felt like he was going to be ripped away from it into the imaginal realm on several occasions. He was terrified of becoming so-called insane or mad. So yeah, we'll mention that in passing a few times. So you're right. Both of you are right that it is a scary situation. Can be.
Can be.
So I see that Belinda has her hand up. So love to hear from you, Belinda.
To unmute myself. One of the several things that crossed my mind listening to all of this is at in the early part of the 1900s, the 20th century, there were some other movements going on that in some way parallel Jung and may in fact or contrast Jung. I was thinking about the development of archaeology, which gave us more knowledge and insight into prehistoric, pre-literate, as well as early literate civilizations such as Mesopotamia. Translation of all those clay tablets revealed a lot of things that surprised people, stories parallel to things found in the Old Testament and so forth. And then there was also the development of anthropology, the study of man, humans, I would rather say, in different cultures and how different cultures organize themselves to maintain the life of a group. And in anthropology, probably revealed to many people, including Jung, some other stories and mythologies other than the ones we're familiar with in the West. And I wonder if this didn't also influence him, especially in developing ideas about the universality of certain archetypes. And Freud would have also been affected by some of this. And then also at that time, there was also the widespread development of certain kind of spiritualistic, what's her name, Madame Blood, I can't get the
Blavatsky.
name. Yeah, her, and that kind of thing. Which in many respects was the opposite of the quote scientific study of men. And yet they would have been able to have quite a conversation, wouldn't they?
Yeah. And this was at the same time that Max Muller was involved in creating this vast library of material from religions that were not well known in the East, in the West at all.
No, that's true. And interestingly enough, we've been watching a program on Mountain Lake, PBS, coming out on Saturday night called Vienna Blood, which is a very interesting program. It's sort of like a Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson combination, except the Dr. Watson is Dr. Max Lieberman, a very young Jewish doctor who's been influenced by Freud and talking therapies and stuff like that, and his association with a police officer who needs his help in catching criminals, murderers. And it's very interesting. It's the showing of the sort of culture of that time that shows up in this, and it's extremely well done. The scripting is well written and the plots are well developed. But it gives you a little bit of insight into that time, which is a time when Jung was developing himself. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Those are excellent insights. It was a rich period of time. There's no question about it. That particular part of Europe at that time, boy, a lot going on.
I have a cute question, and my mom has something to say. Belinda, you mentioned 3 things, but I didn't catch the first word. Before anthropology, you said the first development. We didn't catch what the word was.
Archaeology.
Archaeology? Or anthropology, and then the spiritual development.
Yeah, those are the things I was
and then
talking about.
Thank you very much.
So
welcome.
There was one question though that I think maybe we should pose to Lynette. Perhaps you could tell us a little bit about your background so that people understand how much attention they should pay to everything you say. No, seriously, it would be good to know what your background is.
I'm now almost 85 years old. I was a child in the 1940s when both of my parents went to Zurich over and over again in that Jungian environment. And I have a really receptive nature to that. And my mother and father both talked to me about those complex things when I was a child, and I have just continued. I became a psychotherapist myself, and with a Jungian bent for some 40 years, and I've read extensively the works of Jung and all of his companions in Zurich. It's been very, very rich. I just wanted to go back and just make a comment about what we talked about before, and that was I was really interested in Jung's involvement in the occult world when he was younger. And, that's such a contrast from the scientific field that he kept trying to figure out what was really happening in that occult phenomena, and to get some kind of mental conceptualization about what was happening. So there were those elements that were, I would call, more in the irrational world.
Well, I haven't had much time to dwell on that, but I mean, I realized that he did his doctoral thesis on seances with, was it his cousin Helen Priestwick? So, I mean, he was deeply invested in it, and it wasn't just a flash in the pan. It kept up through his life. So he and William James had a lot to talk about that, for instance. So, but as you know, you just have to decide at some point, well, we have to carve out a little piece of territory in order to be able to make this manageable. But you're quite right, it's important. So I'm curious though, Lynette, how do you feel though about my comment about it's time for a reassessment of Jung based on the Red Book and the Black Books?
Well,
do you think that's had a big impact?
I'm sorry to say I don't think it has. I don't think it's had as I think it's beyond, I think he's still beyond our time. And it's so complex, it's so deep, and it's so broad and so intense that I think it's just blown right over the heads of many people. And it takes a particular personality to be willing to go in and absorb as much as possible from that work.
I remember my mom getting the copy. It was, I'm trying to think how long. You still live in Langley, so maybe more than 6 years.
As soon as it came out,
Yeah.
I was
Right.
parents sent me a copy of that. That book.
And then her mom had a copy as well.
Yeah.
Her mom and dad had a copy. And I remember her being beginning to read it, and she was overwhelmed by it.
Yeah.
I remember her saying, "Oh my goodness, this is too much. It's too much. It's so deep. It's so much. It's overwhelming." And her sense that most people wouldn't really get it. And it was it was maybe too much. It was maybe too much for the world, in a sense. Like, it was so deep in terms of her. I mean, she's also a very highly sensitive person. So she would have read it and just been sort of hit by the material. And I remember very much her talking about it and feeling a sense of almost overwhelmed by the depth and the excruciating quality of it, and even the darkness of it, the real darkness of it. And I actually still haven't read it not because of that, partly because we live in 2025 in a world that goes so fast. I've got so many things to do. I've got kids. I get too many emails. And actually, like, if you're parents, working people nowadays, you really, really, there's a lack of time to go that deep, to invest in reading something of that depth. And it's still here, I hope maybe one day. But I remember the intensity of it. I think, gosh, can I take that in right now? Or I certainly don't have the time to just invest in it, reading it quietly, with focus, with attention, in between like daily life, running around, working, driving kids to fiddle classes, which what I'm doing right now is in between a fiddle class. But that's the intensity of it.
I would just like to add a kind of comical thing about the Red Book is extremely heavy and it's huge. It's not an ordinary sized book. It's huge. And I had to go and build a platform that I could actually set it on that was strong enough and large enough to open it up. So because I couldn't hold it. I couldn't hold it open. It's huge.
I think it's 30 or 40 pounds, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's
amazing.
Is that we separately, but we both moved from the mainland of British Columbia to Vancouver Island. And then when my mom moved, she unpacked everything and she searched everywhere. And this book is like this big by this big. And she looked and looked and she said, believe it, I think I've lost it. It must have gotten through. She was so worried. And it took about 2 years or something, or 3 years. And then she was looking for something and she was looking under these picture frames that she hadn't unpacked and found it in a little box. But she thought, this huge book, how could I have lost it? Thinking about it.
And it's bright red.
Hard to miss. Jack, you had your hand up. What's on your mind?
Yeah, I took it down because I didn't want to be too insistent, but I've been trying to read the Red Book, and I concur entirely with what Lynette is saying. This is not an ordinary book to read. I have never had a reading experience, it's not like an ordinary didactic book, which exposes a number of ideas systematically through different chapters. It's a journey into Jung's subconscious. Are you ready to do that? Can you do that? And so I found it extraordinarily difficult, and I still do. Now, what I wanted to say, Mark, what you're doing is so important, and I think the study of myth is so important and still misunderstood, and it has an impact on religion. And that's for this reason. Because people do not have an understanding of myth, when they read the Bible and the mythological elements in the Bible, such as Jesus walking on water and so on and so forth. I mean, there are many mythological elements in the Bible. People do not know how to interpret these things, so they reject them as fairy tales. I'm in a few groups on the internet, and I'm involved with dialogue with atheists about intelligent design. And I hear this comment so often, we can't believe in these fairy tales. This is nonsense. These are made up stories. And I think the reason is, Mark, because we don't know how to interpret myth. We don't know what to do with it. We don't have experience interpreting it in if you like, in a rational way. So I think the more we become familiar with myth, and the more adept that we become in interpreting it, will we be able to explain the contents of the gospel in the Hebrew Bible to people who just otherwise reject them as fairy tales? I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've heard this comment about the Bible is full of fairy tales that can't be believed. So I think
you're absolutely right. Hermeneutics is the technical term for what you're talking about. How do you interpret? And Jung sees these as symbols, and he spends a great deal of time unpacking the symbols that he has given over decades in some cases. He's not a slow learner, but it takes him a long time to appreciate what gifts he's been given by his unconscious. And so it's great training for us. I think you're quite right that that's the process that we have available to us if we take the time to sit side by side with him and say, okay, what in the world happened to you? What kind of common sense can you make out of it? Well, he was able to crystallize some beautiful theories as a result of that process that he had to go through for 40 more years. Anyway, folks, I see we have run out of time. But hopefully this has intrigued you and you're ready for part 2, which we will have in exactly 1 week from tonight. So if you have comments or questions that you didn't actually articulate tonight and you would like to share them with me, please send me an email. And I will talk to you one-on-one. Okay? Until next week, take care of yourselves. Enjoy the winter.
Night, everyone.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Linda. Thank you, Lynette.
Thank you. This was great.
Thank
Stay
you,
well,
everybody.
stay safe, and stay sane.
Hey,
The
particularly
three
the
S's.
latter. Yeah. Okay.
Good night, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you so
Good
much.
night.